Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I suppose, how on earth did we end up here? I don't know, guys, but it's a colleague of ours called Mariah Stanley. She's a very top sailor. I think she sails in the team racing events you guys do. And she connected me just when we launched the Portsmouth event in December. And she said, go and do a presentation at the club. So actually, I was away at an event, and I called up Stevie and Craig and said, guys, do you fancy stepping in to do a presentation at the club? And honestly, it's such an honour to have these two here. So hopefully we can quiz them and find out the inner workings of SailGP this evening. Formal introductions. Stevie, how on earth did you go from, what are you doing here to start with? I know you're pretty How did you go from this to what you're doing with SailGP?
Yeah, well, I think at that moment in time there, I'm choking my Olympic medal. That meant I'm not sailing on these boats. I was lucky. I raced in the China Olympics and the London Olympics in the 49er class. I was clever enough to be the helm, so hence the slightly non-physical physique. And I raced in the 49er for a long time. Raced Chris Draper, raced Nathan, Pete Burling, all those guys. For a long while, and I ended up. Nowadays, I seem to be asked to coach, which I'm not entirely sure how to take that. But I'm doing a lot of coaching, and I work with the French SailGP team, funnily enough. And yes, but yeah, I've been lucky enough to do the America's Cup in Bermuda. I work with BT Sport. Fortunately, the dentistry requirements for British TV are a lot lower than the American TV, so I got to do that, and which was really cool. And some of the people from Bermuda were involved with SailGP, and I think the fact that I had at least some understanding of these boats, which hopefully will give you a little insight into the fact that they are boats, but it's quite a different game than certainly I'm used to sailing 49er, and I'm sure you're all used to in the boats you sail. The same skills are there. It's just basically happening an awfully lot quicker, and there's a little nuance to it. But at least I had some understanding, if not as much as I like working with French. And I got asked to do the commentary, and I think I see SailGP as I love sailing. I always have, and SailGP, love it or hate it for whatever it is. It's an opportunity for us to kind of get sailing to more people than just ourselves that enjoy it, and hopefully understand that we're not quite as mad as we maybe seem in January in a wetsuit or whatever it is, or maybe we are mad and maybe they enjoy that factor of it too. But it's a very real privilege to do what I do. I still work coaching, so I was coaching Ellie Aldridge, the kite surfer in Marseille in the summer, which was another piece of putting yourself in the right place at the right time, because she was phenomenal and would have won with anyone, but I got to go and do that. So I still do a lot of coaching, and then very involved with SailGP, and mostly just make the right umpiring calls, which Craig should listen to a little bit more.
We have someone listening into the commentary, yes. And normally the phrase TV agrees.
Yes.
Comes up.
And without further ado, I think it's so interesting seeing your relationship stuck in London for most of the racing around the world. So, sailing's changed a lot in the last few years. We normally carry a twin 300 horsepower rib around the world that looks after the boats. They can't keep up with the F50s anymore. So, Craig on the left went from this to this, which has been quite a transformation. So, Craig, maybe explain your journey with SailGP, I suppose.
I started umpiring 25 years ago, having done team racing at university, worked for World Sailing and was part of their race officials program, so I thought it would be interesting to try and become an umpire, so I did that. And then I got some opportunities along the way, so I was invited to Valencia in 2007, and I've been involved in the Cup ever since. So you see here, this was during the Cup match in 2013. I was the passenger in the boat. And so, I've been involved in 2013, was involved again in Bermuda. And then when SailGP came along, I was in the right place. I've done quite a bit of the digital work in the container, because we used to have two boats on the water, and then 3 people in the container. And I've done quite a bit of the container work. And so I got involved in SailGP. And initially I was out on the water. And then in the second year, Tom stole our boat. Based on was it environmental reasons that we weren't allowed to
get rid of containers.
Get rid of containers. And we moved the operation to Ealing. We used to be on site in the container that held the live line equipment. So they had the live line graphics and hardware, and we were in one end of that container. And then that came to the car park in Ealing. Tom expanded his team, or Tom Peel expanded his team, which meant that we were shoved out of the container into a studio. And so we then started building the studio in Ealing, using the Umpire as the basis and the television feeds. So that's kind of where we got to. And we've developed that over the last, probably season 5 now. So season 2 was when we went fully digital. So we've been doing that ever since, and been doing that in West London.
Brilliant. Well, the format for this evening, basically, we'll kind of go through the origins of SailGP, we'll quiz Stevie and Craig, and then we'll end up kind of with about 10-15 minute section at the end for you guys to grill us about any questions you have about SailGP or the organisation. So a bit of a history lesson to start with, kind of stems a little bit from this image. I don't know if any of you recognise this scene. Do you know where it is by chance? Not that, there's a bit of fog in the background which gives it away, but yeah, my dad calls it Fat Sam's Disco. I don't know why he calls it that, but he tells me where you're going. Now, this is in 2013, the America's Cup, so first foiling generation of the Cup. And this was run by Larry Ellison and Russell Coutts, who are the owners of SailGP. So I suppose we're kind of like the kind of non-birth child of the America's Cup in a way. We're kind of twice removed. We've got a different format, but we kind of, the thought process started here in San Francisco about 12 years ago. What happened after this, they had one of the main US broadcasters complained about the viewership of sailing. It dropped off after about 21 minutes of watching the TV. And these races were, I think were about 45 minutes, something like that-ish. And so, it's a long time for somebody to watch the sport on TV. Particularly somebody who doesn't sail. So us as sailors, if you watched a long race, it's hard to keep engaged, particularly if there's separation. And then that ended up turning into the 2017 America's Cup, where they had they weren't actually one design, the hulls were one design, the front element of the wing was one design, and they were called an AC-50. So what happened was, they had maybe not the Royal Thames, but they had an agreement where 4 teams were going to do an America's Cup World League, and the only team not to sign into that agreement was Emirates in New Zealand. So all of a sudden in Bermuda, about 100 people lost their jobs overnight, and the America's Cup went to New Zealand. And Larry and Russell took the AC-50s, gutted them back, and made them into a one-design boat that we use today. So it was kind of birthed from the Bermuda America's Cup, if that makes sense. Okay, the format. Yeah, Stevie, maybe you run us through this. What is SailGP compared to other sailing events, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, nation be nation, although I'm certainly dubious passports, maybe, I think, at the moment. And in my opinion, I hope that we do keep that evolving a little bit. I like the nation be nation, but the catchphrase that's not on here is the best sailors in the world. And well, I don't know, personally. I'm not a SailGP employee, I should actually start off with, but it's just Stevie Morrison Sailing Limited. So just as a caveat to it, so I think it's most important we have the best sailors. So generally speaking, it is nation be nation, but there's Giles Scott, there's Dylan Fletcher, there's Ben Ainsley, there's quite a few good British, the Australian. Nathan Outridge isn't racing this year. So I think that's one thing we have to do. But it starts off with the principle of nation be nation. I think it's starting to turn slightly more Formula One, where we're getting teams coming in that are national. But then the most important bit is, yes, best sailors. They are under a national identity, which I guess is pretty fun to have. And it's just short races, 14 minutes. I'd argue maybe a 41-minute race if I was commentating would be exciting. But no, I think the 14 minutes is we get once you've got the start and the first 2 laps, the race does often spread. I mean, there's some races you'd like to go on forever, but there's a lot of races you wish were finished after 1 lap. So I think that ultimately we're trying to get a lot of races because, again, in this short course format, fast boats, Ben Ainsley's only a hero because he had a full series of races at the Olympics. If he had 1 race and there was an unlucky wind shift or something like that, then, however good he is, and we all know how good he is, he probably wouldn't have 4 gold medals because of the variety of the variables in our sport. So I think the fact we have the short races and we try and make sure we've got plenty of them gives us the top 3 teams in the final after 7 races. And I'm going to caveat that by saying, as a commentator, if you imagine commentating on Ben Ainsley's race in Sydney, where you see that guy in 37th, as long as he can stay ahead of the guy in 39th who's going backwards and turning around in the circle, if he doesn't get to 21st and then there's not a protest, he'll still win that gold medal in about 4 hours' time after racing. Still feel easier to go, that person that's winning, they keep winning, they win. and I think that's kind of where we're trying to end up. And is it the best way now of just 1 race at the end of the year? I don't know. As I say, I was at the Olympics with Team GB, and we had Emma Wilson, who in my opinion was robbed. And then Ellie, who she went into those finals second, and the format in the kiting was that the person going in first had 2 chances effectively. If Ellie won both races, then she'd win, which she did. But there was that little variable. You had a chance as the leader to make a mistake. So I'm intrigued to see where it goes. But right now we come down to 3 boats, and it's winner takes all. And actually sat in the commentary booth, not getting any of this $2 million prize. I don't really care. Other than it's exciting, that's their first world problem. But yeah, we've ended up now with a fully professional season where all the athletes on the boat are paid. Some of them pretty well paid. Tom's things we don't roll out of bed without a few Rolexes on him. And he is pretty well paid. And then all this prize money. So if you take, for example, San Francisco, where they were a week, 2 weeks, yeah. Which those top 3 boats get to the final is $800,000 prize money. So the winner gets $400,000, second place $240,000, third place $160,000. Mum would be proud of my posh education. Yeah. So just about get it all put together. And that just goes to sailors. So that's on top of there. So we're at the point now where actually it's proper money, and it's a proper professional league. So when they are actually shouting and when they are seriously annoyed with Craig, it's because he's cost them about $200,000. So we are, and so ultimately over the season, they've got the opportunity to win each event. Top 3 boats will go to a grand final, which this year is going to be in Abu Dhabi, and we hope we get one of the windy days. There. But they are there. There are windy days there, so I'm going to work on the theory that I'm lucky rather than good. They'll turn up, and that final race is $2 million, and hopefully for a trophy that's starting to become, let's be honest, it's never going to be America's Cup in terms of that kind of historic level to it. However, it's a competition in equal boats where we can say that's the best sailor rather than the richest guy that's won the event. So it's kind of fun.
Craig, do you feel any pressure in your role? Because when season 1 there was no prize purse, and now you're kind of commander.
Whether there's money there or not, there's always pressure. So you're always looking to put yourself in a position where you can make the best decision. We've got all the tools that we need to make good decisions. With the Umpire, we get all the data, and so really there's no excuse for making a bad decision. And so there's no more pressure because of the prize money. There's enough pressure kind of from within to kind of make sure that you make a good call.
Great. Okay, we'll quickly flash through these. So just to give you an idea, so we've got 12 teams this season. I think the last time we raced in the UK, I think we had 8 teams, if I remember, in Plymouth. So we're going to begin Portsmouth this year with 12 teams. The Italians and the Brazilian teams are new to SailGP.
And one thing I'd like, Tom.
Yeah.
So here we've got the Italian team. They've not got the picture there, but Carl Langford, he left the Australian team where he was pretty much winning 40 or 50 grand an event as one of the 5 people on because they were nearly bolt-on winners. He's left them to go to Italians, Andy Maloney, the flight controller, there he is on board the Brazilian boat with Martinez. I want to know what they're getting paid in their transfer. Now, SailGP haven't actually disclosed that yet, so I'm quite interested. Giles Scott's gone to Canada. Dylan got brought in by Ben. I think we haven't got into it enough, but they are. We're starting to get the kind of money, and also on the 12 boats, I think we've managed a lap and a half.
Yeah, yes.
And they all just crash into each other and the boats.
Oh, is that right?
So we're looking, as a commentator, I'm looking forward to 12. But,
Rio.
Yes.
Yeah. But they actually, SailGP used to have a very strict nationality rule, and they laxed it a little bit to allow the new teams to basically, a bit like football, have a transfer window off season and select the top sailors. I've got to say that the rumour mill is Andy Maloney, who's the flight controller, which we'll come on to in a second. Apparently he is really good. Really
He's won a couple of America's Cups.
He's decent.
With the top team for a number of years.
Yeah, we need to find that out. Maybe we can call Russell at the end or something. Okay, so season 2025. So we're going to Brazil next month in May, then we go to New York in June. And then event 8, we're actually going to be on the south coast in Portsmouth. Now, it will be massive. Based on an event a lot of us were involved in 2016, a World Series event. It was over 100,000 people there. We need to make it huge for the sake of the sport in the UK. So we'll come on to that a bit at the end of the presentation. So, exciting season ahead. The ambition is to get to 20 events. So a bit like when you turn the TV on the weekend, SailGP is popping up on, I can't say BT Sport anymore. TNT. Exactly.
With 20 events and 20 votes.
Now, 20 events is impossible right now because SailGP owns 110 40-foot shipping containers. To get 110 shipping containers around the world, you physically couldn't empty the container, build the boat, assemble it, and go to the next event. So there's a bit of a think tank going on. The office is only down the road, by the way. There's a bit of a think tank going on. How can we get to 20 events without building double the amount of boats? And amazingly, coming onto the boat, actually, there's a designer in New Zealand called Mike Drummond. He designed, you guys know the two Black Magic, the Kiwi boats are on the wall there. He designed those. He was involved with the design team. He designed the F50, and when he designed it, it was meant to go into a 40-foot shipping container. So there's actually a crash bow section, pretty much the green part of the Aussie boat, that comes off. And the entire wing also fits into a container just about, goes in with inches to spare. So the whole boat's modular to a 40-foot shipping container. If we had an AC-75 or, actually, we'll come on to that in a second, an RC-44, which Russell designed, was a similar format. But some of these larger boats you have to roll on, roll off on a ship. It'll be impossible for us to run our formatting. A couple of other interesting things about the boats. They weigh about 2.4 tons for a 50-foot boat, which is pretty light. The wing is modular, so we'll come on to that in a second. It's kind of like a big jigsaw puzzle, really. We've just changed the hydrofoils, which we'll go on to in a sec. 6 athletes on board. SailGP can delete two of the sailors, if we need the boats to kind of encourage them to start foiling. And top speed. Does anyone know the top speed out of interest that we hit on an F50? In kilometres or knots, very controversial subject. But by the way, kilometres is really to do with being aligned with other sports. Trying to click the Tour de France on and you've got your kilometres an hour. I don't know how your maths is, Stevie, but it must be driving you nuts. But
just read what's on the screen.
Yeah, exactly.
Very blunt instrument.
Yeah. So recently in racing, we've hit 99 kilometres an hour on a reach. So 53 knots in 53 knots in old money. And then in testing, they did 102 kilometres an hour recently, which is 55 knots of boat speed. So it's pretty quick,
In what wind?
That's in about 22 knots of wind, I think. So, and it depends which rig you got on, but we'll dive into that. Craig, Stevie, anything on the boat that you guys kind of fascinates you, or anything to comment on? Or
I just think, we'll maybe come on to the wings a little bit, but it's the whole thing now is the steering wheel's here. and we're talking about the steering wheel, and this is a season 1 iteration, but they're dealing with buttons, but the wing trimmers aren't using a kicker or a bang and a sheet or anything like that. It's they're pressing hydraulic presets and not to throw too much credit away of the Kiwis, but our wings now mirror a lot of what they did with the hydraulic systems in it, and I think that the whole mindset for the sailors, where they're having to think like a pilot rather than a sailor. There aren't the ropes, it's hydraulics, it's buttons, it's presets of where you want these things to go. I think that's the bit that I, as a sailor, struggle to kind of get my head around, is the fact that they are, they want to round a mark, and they're a little bit tight on ley lines, so they can't kind of be as far out on the trapeze. They've got to be kind of crouching in a bit. Well, they just press a button and take off a little bit of righting moment on the boat, and then they're going to come into the boat and they have to touch a bit more righting moment on, and then he's trimming the wing, and you see Draper or whatever, and he's got one rope, but we always say the wing trimmers are professional easers because the grinders have to pull it in. He just is letting it out the whole time, making them work, but he's doing it all with buttons, and I think that's, for me, because also one time I've done a little bit. I sailed with Artemis in sort of 2013 to 2015 time, and as I said, didn't get the Olympic gold medal, so I didn't get to sail on the boat. But what was really interesting, there's no feel on these wings. They don't flap. It's just this solid lump. There's not the sensation we're used to from a wing. I mean, the Americans did a very good example of not having any feel, and it flips over if you put it at the wrong angle to the wind. So I think how switched on the sailors have to be from the moment the boat's leaving the mooring and the way they're going is without the normal feel. I think that's what's a really interesting part. It's to say a lot of the same skills, but very different sensations that they're dealing with.
Craig, anything for you?
Well, I mean, the only thing from the kind of umpire side is that it's often difficult for us to really kind of get the feel of the conditions, which is why we use the television a lot, and why we try and listen into to the teams and what they're talking about on board, and to try and get that fear factor. And that's why we do a debrief as well, because it's one of the coaches said that we should have a leaf blower in our booth. And as it gets windier on the water, you turn up the leaf blower, so we can actually feel, what the conditions are a little bit, because we don't, it's difficult when we're watching a cartoon, basically, how much fear there is out on the water. When boats are approaching at such fast speed, you just get used to sort of seeing the boat doing 40 knots, 45 knots, and so you kind of get desensitized to it. And then when you look at the television, you see them bucking and tipping and getting really close. You then get that feel for how much fear there is. And we kind of try and judge that for how close we want boats to get before we give them a penalty. And we try and get that out in the teams as well. You say, how scared are you in this situation? And as the breeze comes up, we try and keep the boats apart. So that's kind of where really we're looking at the F50.
Cool. Yeah, I just realised there's a lot of Aussie imagery in here. Not like it seems like, okay, I don't know if they get kind of rights for presentations if they win a season or something like that. But another Aussie wing here. But just thought I'd show you the wing. You don't often see it in this kind of orientation. So this is flat down in one of the wing sheds before it goes out. A lot of people kind of think about the wing as being more aerodynamic. It's actually got quite a large profile on the front of it. The secret with the wing is your ability to generate power from a similar size surface area to conventional sail. And it's kind of like a jib and a mainsail overlapping in the most efficient form. And the more you can kind of invert or induce the wing, the more power you generate. So that's kind of the secret behind the wing. And then within SailGP, we literally have a stack reefing system. So you can actually delete, I like the seagulls flying there, you can delete the middle section there, and you can reduce the wing down to an 18-metre wing. This is how the design started. Or you can actually increase the wing up to a 29-metre wing now. We didn't have that in season 1. Kind of looks like doesn't look suit the aesthetics of the boat, does it? It looks like a little stump. That's the right one, and the big one just looks odd as well. Crossovers, I think that's probably now plus 20 knots of true wind speed. You have to make the decision the day before sailing, and that's kind of the all-purpose wing. That will go beyond 20 knots, but they should make a executive decision the day before with the weather forecaster. And then the big wind probably comes on in a risky environment, probably sub 7 knots of wind. We were chatting this morning actually, and the wing is amazing. This conventional sailing, 49er is probably an exception, but a laser or maybe a J70 probably ease your rig out to about 80, 90 degrees going dead downwind. Does anybody know how many degrees is the maximum ease of the wing if you're sailing, if you're not panicking? If you're sailing normally by the polars.
If you get this right, you might end up leaving watching the event, so be careful.
Yeah. In degrees.
15.
Yeah, you must have been listening to Stevie's commentary. Yeah, it's 14 degrees max ease, and that's on a reach. So it's even tighter, actually dead downwind when you've got more power on. So no, it's barely anything, and that's why it's quite hard to identify if you're going up or downwind.
What's it when you're hard on?
So again?
What's it when you're hard on the wind?
Yeah, you're probably on centre line. And then what they're doing a lot now, the reason we've got this new electro-hydraulic wing is you're playing with the twist a lot more. So it's like a robotic flap, if you like. The other interesting thing that we were chatting about as well, the wing doesn't generate that much power. To get to 50 knots, it only needs 150 kilograms of thrust, which is nothing really. Kind of, it's more comparable to probably pushing an ice skater. There's no resistance in the water. So it's not that powerful, but it's just the thrust is the push forwards, the lift from the wing. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple of slides. So one thing I wanted to quickly show you maybe is this one. These are the old polars. It's changed a bit now with the new hydrofoils, but you can see on the bottom right hand side, so 22 knots of wind, the boat's doing about 50 knots of boat speed, so 49.8. And if you look, one AWS, 62.3 knots. So when they're basically tracking upwind, they're generating about the same force as a hurricane, Cat 1 hurricane on the deck. So 64 knots is a Category 1 hurricane. The sailors are kind of experiencing the same level of apparent wind. Mad, isn't it? And then they have to, some poor bugger has to run across halfway through it as well, you know. Cool. Stevie, maybe explain to us what this odd-looking device is here.
Yeah, well, it's much like this kind of steering wheel. We've got now a flight controller, so I think in many ways that makes it, you know, brilliant. We always used to talk of sailing a 49er as if ever I did a talk, I'd explain it as someone's doing the steering wheel and someone else is doing the pedals, you know. Whereas now that's happening in 3 dimensions. So there's someone doing the steering wheel, there's someone doing the pedals, and then the other guy's doing the gear stick, I guess. And this device here is what they call the coffee grinder. And from a simple point of view, the forward and back is down, up. So that's what the flight controller's doing. They're sat down in a box, barely peering out, so they've got no real vantage point of what's coming, which is why, you know, if you can get into the comms and don't have me talking over it, which, let's be nice to me tonight. Well, no, I totally agree. Yeah, and also sometimes I talk over them swearing, which is to say. But yes, you've got the down and up, but they've also then got the settings of how fast those things will move. The flight controller can control the rudder, how much lift and down force is on the rudder. So, you know, we've always the leeward side of the boat is lifting to keep the thing in the air, but the windward, well, maybe not always, most of the time, sometimes it's neutral. But and then the windward side is pulling you down, so it's like your righting moment, and they're constantly playing that off with the wing trimmer. So there's just this constant battle of how it will go, and then also every time you do a manoeuvre, so if you're going to go into a jibe in a gust, you're doing 45 knots. If your board goes down with 1 degree of angle on it, your boat's just going to fly up in the air. Whereas if you're only going in at 37 knots, the board will go beautifully level. And if you're a bit slow, it will pull you down the other way. So you've got to, the angle the board will drop at is dependent on the speed you're going to keep the boat flying right into it. So the flight controller's got to kind of know, along with the driver, and the teams can sort of, you know, spread out the workload how they want. But they will be, we're going into this in a lull, right, okay, we need to be on preset 2, so they'll be hitting a button up here to take them to a different preset, and they're going in and they're flying the boat, and then as the new board drops, then they're flying both boards, so then they're going up with that one and down with that one, which I'm going to try and touch my head on the chest. Because none of us need that. And that's kind of where we are with that basically. And then this here, you come into the wing trimmers panel where he's got the kind of joysticks to move the twist, and again certain presets on it, and they can trim the jib, they can drop boards. I mean, it's and all the teams will break that up differently. Again, something we don't do a very good job of on the TV of explaining, but is that actually if you watch the Australians, Tom Slingsby will fly the boat through the manoeuvre, whereas a lot of the other boats, the flight controller will do both boards and then swap, whereas Slingsby does one of the new boards and turns to that. So that the teams break up how they do that, the ergonomics of it differently. But I mean, it ain't a load of cleats and pulleys. Yeah. Would be a lot shorter way of saying what you just said, really.
So what that device is doing is actually controlling a huge cassette inside the boat. There's a massive kind of 6-foot hydraulic ram inside the hull that's moving these hydrofoils forwards and backwards. These are the old design hydrofoils. We've got new foils. So if you guys come down to Portsmouth, you'll see a totally different design and a different sound, which we'll come on to. What they used to have was a GoPro camera under the beam of the boat looking into the water. And on one of these boards, actually somewhere in this drawing here, maybe where that red mark is, they had a white blob emerging. And what was happening, at about 47 knots of boat speed, you're generating so much low pressure on one side of the foil, seawater starts vaporising off the foil. So effectively boiling. And if you do a lot of power boating, you'll hear the word cavitation a lot. So we've had to redesign the foils. There's quite a lot of thickness in the join, the corner of the foil there. So what they've actually done for this season is they've developed a new hydrofoil. So it's called, it's a T-foil, but it's actually an upside down T. It's a titanium T-foil, and it's milled out of a brick. It looks like, I don't know if you've seen the pictures of the initial bit of titanium, but it looks like a brick that's just been dropped off by a truck. And it just goes through the CNC machine and comes out as this beautiful kind of samurai sword, if you like. Which ends up looking like this. I think this was in New Zealand.
Just before he hit the mark and snapped
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's about 15% thinner. They think the cavitation threshold goes to about 55 knots now. And it's amazing. The boats make a different sound. And I think the sailors voted. I don't know if you two are sometimes involved with these sailor votes, but they voted for this sacrificial carbon tip on the outside of the foil. And the theory is, if it hits anything, it should snap or before damaging the other vessel or a mark. But I think the mark was pretty worse off, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think originally the foils were going to stick out a little bit further, but I think there was a bit of feedback that having a dagger sticking out the side of the boat was could be a little bit dangerous. I think they did quite a lot of work on getting that shorter. So the high-speed boards, it's about 75 centimetres. It sticks out now, and they're actually building some light air T-foils where they're going to have a bigger span, so it will go out a little bit more. And so there was then quite a bit of discussion about whether we should put a box around the boat for rules purposes, like we do in the America's Cup. But in the end, we've decided not to. We're going to sort of see how they all get on, but certainly there's a lot more nervousness about getting close. So, the distances we're keeping the boats apart is certainly a little bit more, and we have indicators in our software system that shows where the maximum distance out the foils could be. So when we see someone getting close, we say, we can see why you're getting nervous because there's a foil tip potentially coming quite close to you. So that's kind of how we see it from the kind of the umpire side.
I think when they were testing it, it looked great on the computer models, great design, beautiful. I think Paul Campbell-James jumped on board and he was just getting sprayed by the outer edge of the foil because there's no foil sticking out the side before. So I think now they're making a little cassette or a little spray barrier to protect the wing trimmers now, so you see it getting hollowed there. One interesting thing that I found through Mike Drummond actually, if you guys have watched SailGP live, you hear this high-pitched whistling sound. I think on the broadcast, Stevie's like, oh my god, what is that sound? And a lot of people think it's the wind noise off the rig, it's the wing. Some people say it's the sailors. In season 1, the producer tried to get rid of it. They tried to get rid of the sound. Like, what is that? What's that noise? And it's actually all the hydrofoils. There's a kind of a microcosm of kind of air, if you like, that comes off the trailing edge of the foils, and it makes that high-pitched whine. And you'll hear the sounds different on the new foils because of the finish to the blade, the trailing edge. Stevie, explain this on. It looks like an April Fool's joke. It might actually be. We'll see.
I'm not sure this is the environment to explain it. SailGP is, I think, I like it. I don't like it when they're all sat in the water and it's I've got a different way of saying it. You're trying to shine something up to make it seem prettier than it is. And it is perhaps a way of putting it, and it's not quite as fun. I mean, there's actually still the tactical side is very, very interesting, but these boats will stay once they're foiling. Well, and if you watch America's Cup, and we hook on a rope, and they kept that off telly a little bit, but it's, I thought, a really interesting part of it, and I was working with the Athena team for sort of the last 2 months, and that was a big part of our training, was where you'd set up for your tow and for your timings and stuff. Basically, these boats will fly in less wind than they need to take off. And so what SailGP are trying, I'm not sure how I feel about this, I'm relatively confident how you're going to feel about it, but we're trying a propulsion system. So ultimately, if you do touch through a manoeuvre, you'll have X amount of curves or whatever it is in Formula 1 that they use as a boost button to be able to hit and hopefully then pop you straight back onto the foil. That's fundamental. I mean, how you're going to judge that, Grego, I don't know.
Well, I think that's discussion as to, I think it's permanently deployed, and so you've just got to work out how and when you can use it. And the main thing is when you're off the foils, you can then, between certain wind angles, you'd then be able to use it to be able to get back on the foil. But certainly you wouldn't be able to point straight head to wind and press the engine on. That's kind of not the point. It's really, because if you're coming out of a jibe and you do splash down, you want to be able to get back straight on the foil again. So we'd put strict limits on true wind angles where you can use the foil, use the
engine.
Use the DRS system.
Sorry, yes.
The drag reduction system. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's under trial at the moment, so we'll see if it actually goes on the boat. But there'll be nothing worse than turning up to a SailGP event and they're all just flat in the water. And the idea is it'll probably broaden the racing window. By the way, there is actually no upper wind limit in SailGP. I don't know if you guys knew that, but Ian Murray just goes and just figures it out. But it's a combination of wind strength and sea state. So we've got a very flat sea state with we had 28 knots in Saint-Tropez a couple of years ago. And then down to probably 3 knots, just lifting a hull. But the idea behind this is normal takeoff speed is 6.5 knots of true wind, 15 knots of hull speed. So the idea behind that is
that's worth holding on to, though. They don't take off until they're doing over 15 knots.
Yeah.
I don't know what boats you guys say. Yeah. They're going pretty bloody quick before they even take off. I mean, that's one of the things that blows my mind. That's pretty fast.
Yeah.
Before you even fly.
Something you forget about as well. If you're ever watching the racing, if you see a boat drop off and Stevie's screaming at them, they're probably getting to that 15 knot threshold in the downtrend.
30 knots an hour.
What about the drag of that?
It would be clear of the water once it's sailing. So it's just there as a boost, and then it's up and out of the water. That's the idea.
And has that kind of come from conversations with F1?
I think there's some...
There's been lots of conversations between some of the teams and then quite little and stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a drag reduction system, but it'd be interesting to see...
Grego.
If you hear the commentary in the next couple of years, it's all started here. But yeah, there's definitely an influence of that, but more importantly, it's making sure the broadcast and the viewership for us watching it is entertaining. Otherwise, you don't turn it to...
That's the only reason.
Yeah, it is. We have such a great sport in the lower wind ranges, but it's when you get to that 2, 3, 4, 5 knots of wind speed, my heart sinks.
I don't know if you watched Chicago last year, but they were rowing with the boards because Craig hadn't thought of them. So they could drop the board and then they pressed another button that stowed it, to stow it, it had to go back and then straight up.
It was. We were sitting watching our computer graphics going, because we get shown when the boards are travelling, when they're up, and when they're locked down, and it was like, what are you guys up to? And it's like, just have a look on the telly here.
It's what we're trying to achieve is a sport that you can't just fill up with fuel. And telly, the reality of telly, my first race in the 2008 Olympics, I crossed the start line, drifting upwind on the tide. Both of us stood under the boom with sails flapping. Because the reality of this, the top end of our, if that's the top end, whatever. The televised part of our sport is telly dictates when we go, and if we want the sport to be, again, the America's Cup this year, from a sailing point of view, it's great. They wait for a speed limit and they'll stay on air for as long as it takes. But if you want a broadcaster to take you, and then you want the sponsors to come in to make it sustainable, so it's not just funded by Larry Ellison or Ernesto Bertarelli or Sir Jim, then it's also Ben now. Seems like he's potentially got a bit of coin. You've got to start when it says it will start on telly, and I get it's very much the hard end of where we are. Is we've got this great sport and we've got to try to and it's quite hard to sit in a room like this, but that's when I say we're turning, not tacking. It's if you're trying to. We're trying to make it kind of start when it said start, and that's ultimately how you get TV to come on. Yeah. And TV brings sponsorship, and sponsorship brings a level of longevity to it more than a win.
Yeah, obviously a lot of us in this room are invested in the sport, but when you go to some of the events, you see people turning up and they go, bloody hell, I never thought I'd like sailing, and this is incredible. So it is catching those audiences that aren't actually captured by the sport normally, and hopefully they eventually sign up to a local sailing club and take part, get on the crew and see what they do.
So realistically, actually, are we calling it sailing or flying? There's a lot of it, because I fly, and to be honest, a lot of it is relative. Why bother having a steering wheel if you can just fly with buttons? You can just have a
Yeah. I think with SailGP it's an element of keeping it a sport. You see all of the athletes running across. There's a flight. We could automate the flight control. You could just put it on a computer system and it would fly the boat for you.
Yeah.
So it's about challenging the sailors, the athletes, to see who is the actual best team versus just saying, let's have a full technology race. So that's the balance, I think. We've got an interesting section next. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll try and fly through that. So I'll hand over this. I'll call this Craig's crash section. But, Craig, maybe explain. It's really interesting. Stevie's role and Craig's role are very different to what we've done in the last 10 years in sailing. They don't travel with the event, and I think a lot of other sports are looking at SailGP for that. So, Craig, maybe just explain what this is, and we'll deep dive into it.
Yeah. So this is a picture of the graphic system, the liveline system that SailGP owns and uses. And everything that we do, certainly from the Umpire side, everything that we do is based off this. Without this, without the broadcast and broadcast technology, then we wouldn't get the data that we can use to be able to sit in Ealing and make the calls. So, in 2000, go back to 2007, they had like Virtual Eye, which is a full kind of cartoon graphic, as it were. And then they worked out that if they could put graphic across the surface of the water, then you could see the live action, but you could also see the bits like where are the boundaries, where are the marks, how many meters is it up the course, and so that was all brought around. Stan Honey was the guy that had the technology with the first down line in football, in the American football, and also the hockey puck. And a guy called Ken Milne came along with all the hardware, and so they've got these super accurate GPS units that they put in missiles, basically. And originally, back in 2012, they had to have a letter from the Secretary of State for Defence to take them out of the country because they were very worried about people getting hold of this technology. And that technology is now refined, and so we get the data so that we can look at it. And so we know the speeds of the boats, we know where they are within a couple of centimetres. We can put boundaries on the courses, and so we can show those boundaries to the teams. They know how far from the boundaries they are, so they can see all that information. So we can sit in Ealing and basically make the calls, because it's more accurate for us to be in Ealing making the calls than it is to be out on the water.
Right.
And so you can see here we have this gorgeous studio in Ealing, the Emirates Umpire Studio, which came online this year. We've been in various places within the Ealing setup, but we've been given this lovely studio. Might want to go to the actual reality of the situation.
You don't have to sit there.
Yes, this is where we sit and watch. So I can understand how Chris Hemsworth feels. Chris Hemsworth Thor when he's doing his movies now. Yeah, we're part of the Marvel world.
Quite clearly,
So this is our setup in Ealing. So we have 6 umpires in Ealing. So you'll see on the where we set up. So on the left-hand side here, at the back, on the back row, you'll see our TV EBS system. So we have a TV operator that comes. It's one of the umpires, and we've learned how to use this TV replay machine, which is what they use in football, VAR. It's exactly the same system. So we get 16 feeds in. So we've got 12 boats. We've got 2 helicopters. Then we've got a chase boat, and then another view, maybe the umpire or program. Because we want to see what Stevie sees as well. It's sometimes useful because we get to listen to.
You get the right call.
You do get the right call. And then what we'll see here as well, we see these comms panels where we can tune into all the boats as well, so we can listen to what's going on board if we want to. We can listen to the program. We can talk to various people across the SailGP world, whether they're in the UK or whether they're on site. So I talk to the race committee quite a lot, asking them if they wouldn't mind moving their marks a little bit to make our lives a little bit easier. Normally comes back with a no, Russell wants it there. So we say that's fine. We've got rules. We can make it happen, and then we just cross our fingers and hope it all goes okay. And then we've got the umpire stations, which are in the front row, and so we'll normally have 3 umpires in Ealing, and we'll have 1 or maybe 2 remote. So we can have 6. In Ealing, but
when you say remote, you mean at their home in Poland,
at their
or
home,
Spain, or wherever, or Australia.
So we've got a guy that lives in Perth, Western Australia. So he just logs on, runs the system from home, and you can actually run the UmpApp system off a mobile phone. So a couple of years ago, we had the finals where the guys that were remote lost their connectivity, and so they just plugged it into their 4G connection, and they umpired fine. So it's
Not what Tom thinks he said.
Yeah. So that's kind of how it all runs. So yeah, a little studio in Ealing, just around the corner from Stevie.
So, slightly nerdy question. What's the latency or delay if you've got a bunch of people sailing live in Brazil and you're sat in Ealing making decisions on stuff? What's the time delay between those 2 things happening and you making a decision and various other things could have happened in the meantime?
So we the software system we force it to sit 1 second behind reality. The data comes back in milliseconds, and it goes from the venue to Tokyo, San Francisco, and London. So it's shared across 3 different data centres, and then we've got a direct fibre connection from Ealing into the data centre in London. And so we force ourselves to be a second back. We tried it at half a second the other week, and it was a bit spotty. And so we're sitting a second behind reality. And then the television sits about another half a second back. So we can see it on the data, on our system, and then we can look up and we can see it again on the television. So sometimes when I make a call, it looks like it's ahead of time, because when I'm calling it, it hasn't made it to television yet. So
it has made it to you yet. That's
so
disappointing to hear.
We see it before you. Slightly. We're looking to get the call out within 7 to 10 seconds. We work really hard on what I call making the call in the first pass. And so that's making sure you've got all the data that you need to be able to make a decision. And it's very much, you need to filter data. It's not about, often when you go match racing and you're in a powerboat, you weren't in the right place, you couldn't quite see the gap, you just weren't quite there. Well, here you've got so much data that you actually need to filter out as much as you can in order to get what's the piece of information I really need to make this decision. And you have it all. So making a mistake is quite upsetting for the umpires because they have everything they need to make a decision. Sometimes if there's a lot going on, 12 votes, 4 umpires making the decision, so that's, you could end up with having 4 or 5 votes that you're looking after because of what's going on around the course. So sometimes you might not see the incident live. So what you can do is you can go back in time, and that's part of why it's such a great system. Is you can go back and you can look, and you can look at it again and grab that piece of information that you need in order to make a call. That does prolong the agony for the sailors, and that happened during the event in Sydney.
Sydney happened with the Italians.
So with
Italians in Brazil.
And also
Australia in the final.
Australia in the final with the Canadians and the Australians. So we saw the incident. Wanted to make sure, it's a final. You've got to make sure. There was some discussion amongst the umpires. We went to review, and it was a very fast review. It was like 4-second review. But then once you add in the discussion, the incident, the discussion, the review, yes, we're going to penalise, then going through and clicking through, it then puts that into 20 seconds. So all of a sudden, you're 20 seconds down the road, whereas you really want to be at 7 to 10 seconds. So that the teams have the ability to do what they need to do as fast as possible. And that's always the aim, is that the longer the penalty takes to hand out, and the longer it takes to take, the bigger a mess it becomes. And so we're really striving to get those decisions out fast.
And how does the sailor make a protest?
They press a button.
Often.
They can rig their wheel, and they can have it on the wheel. They can have it on all the screens.
Often the strategist does it.
The strategist can do it. And then you see here. This is in this picture. This is our little inbox here, and so this is where the message comes through saying there's a protest coming. So we're umpires. We're not referees, and so we respond to a protest from the competitors, unless they go outside the boundary, in which case then we just go ahead and penalise.
Just very quickly, I don't know if you guys have been on the SailGP Facebook fans page recently, but sometimes Stevie cops a bit of heat on there. And I don't think they realise Stevie's in London commentating on the racing. So what's it like from your perspective, being in Ealing? Well,
I have never been on the Facebook fan page. I doubt it's the nicest place to be. And I'm sure a lot of it is very helpful feedback. I ultimately watch the telly. That's as Craig says. I mean, you watch the telly screen. The worst thing you can do is to be talking about something that you guys can't see. So we'll have a situation where we've got a few screens, and potentially you could have all the data, but the reality of it is you're talking to the screen and trying to sort of give as much of an idea as you can. Sometimes you're screaming at the director. I think what we often, I've heard second hand from people that will give me a little bit of that feedback to my face, is that, which is fair enough, they'll often be trying to move the helicopter. So, we'll want to stay on an overhead and watch it, but because the live line and all the data works off it, they have to move the helicopter to reposition. We're not quite at the stage where drones give a good enough feed for broadcast at a quick enough rate. I guess that won't be far off. But at the moment, it I believe, has to be on a helicopter. I think we've tried.
Yeah, I mean, it's because the size of the GPS units. Because I mean, the really tricky bit is basically knowing where you are in 3D space. So you need to have the height, and you need to have the left and the right and the forward and the back. And so that's really the critical part. And in fact, the GPS units don't work above 500 feet, so they're not worth stealing. So terrorists, if they get hold of them, they can't turn it into a missile because it gets to 500 feet, the unit stops working. And so it's all about being in the right position in 3D space. If you think about that, the maths involved in that can get quite mind-boggling.
Yeah, the device on the front of the helicopter, not the camera, is worth about $500,000. It's going to project that live line onto the course.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, haven't got much time, so I'll just quickly run through these. This is Craig's crash section.
Not me that does the crashing, by the way.
Maybe just, I may skip this first one, Craig, and what we'll do is...
Australia way.
Yeah, that's
You
later.
see that.
This one was.
So talk us through we'll go through the French start, I think.
So this was really to show how close the French team were at being, over the line or not over the line. They were 0.1 of a second behind the line.
Good stuff.
But if you see there, they were at 0.1 of a second. They were behind the line. At start time, they were over the line, and so they were about 2.5 centimeters off.
So they're travelling at 15 metres a second.
Exactly.
There's no threshold.
No, and so that's the other thing is that this is the truth. And now, whether it's the real truth, because there are some bits there about last positions, and if the line's moving, then where was the last polling position that came in to say exactly where the start line was. So, but this is the truth, and so the teams need to factor in this truth into their risk management. And so they do go over the line, and so then, the OCS penalty then comes on automatically, and they have to get behind all those boats. But, if you look at their approach to the line, if they just stayed up for maybe a fraction of a second longer, they would have been clear and they would have been gone. They finished the first race first and the second race 10th. For 0.1 of a second. 2.5 centimeters.
Okay, I don't think this has been publicly spoken about, okay? So turn the camera on now, okay? There's an investigation going on from last weekend's racing in San Francisco. And there was a humongous issue with maybe we cursed the Australian boat by having the slides prepped, I don't know. So we'll go through Craig's kind of viewpoint, and then we'll get Stevie's input on what we think happened. But again, this is just opinion, it's not the kind of official comms from SailGP.
So they haven't actually released the outcome yet.
No, nothing. We don't know what the outcome
Well,
is.
they're still doing the investigation. I spoke to the technical manager today, and they said that there's nothing much that they can add because they're still investigating, looking at all the.
So we know. We're sailors, so we know.
Well,
when we get to the bar, we're really
yeah, exactly. The camera's off.
Yeah.
So you see here, we'll see how close it is, and we see the outlines overlap. And so for us, we just raise that as there could be a touch here. So we then send the tech team out to investigate, look for kind of green marks on the underside of the Italian hull or along the side of it. And so we kind of watch them. Is that? And so you see there that the boat stops in our lap. And what happens is when there's a sudden hit, the GPS will just will get unhappy and stop sending data. So we know something's wrong when the boat actually stops on the UMPAP and all the other boats carry on. So we knew that something had happened, but from this we can't see that the wings come off. So we're then relying on our guy watching the television that the wing fell off. And so for us, initially we looked at it and went, well, it looks like they ran into the back of Italy, so that's a penalty on Australia. If their wings come off, then that's going to be some penalty points, And so we were starting to get ourselves lined up for all that, getting that in motion to have a hearing, talk to the tech team. No protest came in from Italy. So the incident just gets closed, and then we start the investigation of looking at the various shots.
Can you run the graphic again?
Yeah, we'll come back to that now. We've got a couple of viewpoints for you. Stevie, maybe you give us what's going on.
Well, I think ultimately some things needs to be bit of one you can chew, and they end up doing. There is actually, my understanding is there is no contact. So when you see from some different angles, the hulls go underneath and miss. So you get the overlap on Craig's view, but there's a three-dimensional element that goes over the bow and actually goes under, and there was no damage to the bow of the Australian boat. So if you watch from here, and I don't know quite how it misses, but it would if it hadn't missed, there'd be no Italian rudder. and they're still going just fine at the minute. I don't think anything. I think ultimately what happened is he went into a gap that wasn't there, and this is a conjecture, totally, but equally I love to have an opinion. And I think with the new T-foils, whereas we had the L foils, that when you went a bit up and turned, they would skid a little bit. And now we've got the T-foils, you've got a bit more of a sideways load. And I think the guy's name was Newton. Ultimately, there was a slight issue of momentum, and the wing was going pretty quickly that way, and he spun the wheel, and the boat gripped and stopped, and the wing just took a lot of sideways load on it. And I think, and I'd liken it where there's Tom Slingsby is the best in the game, but he's made a massive cock up, for want of the right word, and there was no gap there. I mean, the fact on that, if we go back to that graphic in a minute, which I'm sure Tom will, but it was, the Italian boat was doing 39 kilometres now, and the Australian boat was doing 66. So he had to hit the brakes pretty hard, and he did that with the wheel. I think here you watch the speed, he's coming down, but he's way over 20 kilometres an hour faster. He's a lot quicker coming into it. And I would argue they've been bloody lucky, because rumour has it that there's a wing nearly finished in Southampton. Craig's not dishing out any penalty points. They're still top of the leaderboards. Yeah. Fourth. They came fourth. But it's a bit like in Formula One. You can't do anything you want with a Formula One car. You can't go into a corner with the DRS open. And ultimately, Tom Slingsby went in there like he was playing Grand Theft Auto or whatever it was. He went in way too aggressively, misjudged that there was no gap, and then hit the turn, and this is where I think the sailors have to, it's easy for us to criticise the tech or whatever, but my personal feeling is it was just a case of a lot of momentum changing direction very quickly, and the wing wasn't too keen to do that. But we'll find, I'm sure there'll be someone a lot cleverer than me that will tell us at some point. But I feel like the Australians were pretty lucky, if I'm honest.
Yeah,
typical bloody Aussies.
Craig's got a couple of other videos if anyone wants to have a look after as well. Let's skip through to the end here. So this is kind of what we're expecting in Portsmouth. This is an amazing shot from San Francisco the weekend before last. 12 teams. It is unbelievable when you see them racing. I think Stevie and Craig probably haven't had the chance to see it for a while. But
you went, Sam, didn't you?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Sam was there.
Were you there?
I also helped Chris Draper polish his wing on the morning snap. So
Brilliant.
Perfect.
And what's also brilliant in SailGP, all of these marks are robotic. There's a great April Fool's video up yesterday. If you have a chance to watch it, it's fantastic. But what we'll do whenever we go to Portsmouth is we'll make sure that the racing is orientated towards the grandstand, towards the spectators. So that should be pretty cool. Somebody's just on a phone on the sideline, just dragging his marks across. In Denmark a couple of years ago, again, you two couldn't see it, but these guys are watching the F50s, and I thought, bloody hell, they're really into it, but they were watching the robotic marks. The F50 went that way, and they were watching the marks in the middle. Okay, so, I don't know why it's not going. There you go. Biggest ever grandstand in the history of the sport. It was in New Zealand, in Auckland, in January. Portsmouth is scheduled to be bigger. So we need every single club in the UK to get the hype behind sailing for the event on July 19th and 20th. It'll be massive. I think it's scheduled to be 20,000 people there. For the sport of sailing to have 20,000 people watching on the sidelines is enormous. And it's going to help the sport, particularly in the UK. Hopefully the Brits have a good run, but it was, I think, some people were blown away by the event in New Zealand. The head of Emirates, the CEO of Emirates Airlines, said, bloody hell, I did not expect this. So it's a cool product if you guys get the chance to go.
And we have to beat the Kiwis at Surrey.
Yeah, we have to beat the Kiwis.
Will it be part of the business case for removing sailing from the place?
Just a quick bit of event info, the boring stuff, but there'll be a grandstand. There'll be a premium lounge, just for info, that will be launched in about a month's time. Should be a head chef there and what have you. But just get in touch with us and hopefully we'll see you down there. And obviously get behind the British team. You know, we've been talking a lot about the other teams tonight, but Great Britain, what are they in the rankings at the moment, guys? So they second. So
1 point away. So they were looking forward to try and get those penalty points off Australia.
Yeah.
But that was such that never was.
There was a Christmas present come early for Craig, but you know, get behind the British team. They are fantastic. They're a really good team. Skipper by Dylan Fletcher. They've got Hannah Mills on board. They've got some really top talent, and they're showcasing that right now. So,
Got a pretty decent CEO as well.
yeah, the CEO's not bad. You know, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, really looking forward to that. And
We would also take
yeah.
So mention about the people. So I'm sure you used to have 2 tacticians who might have been Olympic medal winners. They've gone.
Yeah.
So what's happening now? What's happening on the boat?
So Hannah Mills, well, she's still called a strategist. I mean, ultimately, we've had a lot of things, and Craig can tell us, but we have them crashing, and there's not really any excuse for that because the strategist could go into the middle. I think what you don't see, and what I would love to have, is that the sailors have a tactical app, so they have it on the wing screen, and also Hannah will have it on her arm, which will show you where you are on the course. It will suggest what they call, we hear them say intersections. So there's points on the course. If you come round the leeward gate and you just turn, you will have to do 3. But if you go 50 metres further, you'd only have to do 2. So she's often looking at the geometry of the course and trying to work out the facts based on, okay, if we can just hold 50 metres, 200 metres longer in this, we'll be able to do it in 2 more manoeuvres. The course completely opens up. You can hold or you can go. So she's watching a raw view of the course like that here and on the wing screen. She can also go into the middle of the boat, because what I think you don't get a great vantage point of, and I don't have that either because I've not done it, but they can't see a lot because the boat is up like this. So they're in a hull on the windward side, and there's actually a slight incline, and there's that huge structural pod in the middle, so they can't actually see very well in the place where it would be quite nice to see, but the strategist can go in there. So normally the strategist and on some teams the grinder too will have that course view,
And they can see the wing screen.
and they can see on the wing screen where they are for the geometry of it. And I think Hannah and Dylan, I mean, it's one of those things where if you go back 2 seasons when the strategists first came in, I think the Canadians did a really good job of really empowering Georgia Llewellyn LaFrance. She was called Llewellyn LaFrance. Whereas, you know, Jimmy Spittle kind of, in many ways, you know, CJ didn't have a lot kind of to do. And it's like any business, I guess, it's how you use the roles on the boat. So I think that the tactics side, boat on boat, is very much led by the driver. Because compared to, say, our version 5, or, you know, I saw out there an amazing model of Australia 2, you know, and that's all happening that little bit slower. You've got the time for the conversation before the intersection with another boat happens. Whereas now, the boat on boat tends to be led by the driver, but the big picture strategy, which is very data-led, because they are, every time they tackle jive, they're losing meters, guaranteed loss of meters. So it's, where does the course open up that I've got to lose just 120 metres, whatever I do, but I'm not going to lose 160 for sure. I open the course up, and the strategist is kind of working that side of it, trying to paint a picture of where are the other boats relative to boundaries. Because I think the thing I find hard when I work with a friend was you're on the water and you've got no idea. You're like, why the hell did they tack there? Idiots. But if you watch it on telly, there's a boundary. So they've got to tack there, you know.
What's the room to tack? You're not going to get someone like
Well, I mean, the rules are slightly different. You know, we've got our own rule book, and it's been running since 2012. And they decided in San Francisco they'd take some rules out where data. So tacking, for instance, they got rid of that rule because, you know, you go through the wind and you don't know when you're on a close hold course, all that kind of stuff. So they got rid of that rule. They got rid of the proper course rules, and then they put a boundary round and went, well, if you're in the boundary, then you can sail your proper course. So as soon as you're in the boundary, light comes flashing on the back of your boat, and then you're allowed to sail your own course if you are the inside boat on the boundary. So there's no calling for room to tack. You just get to the boundary, and if you're the one that's going to have to give the route, you have to know that you're going into the boundary.
Yeah, well, the strategist can.
The
So
strategist
they
knows.
can see the flashing light on the other.
Well,
on
they
their
can also see where they are relative to the boundary, and they've got to get good at knowing it. And there's also tactical software on the wing that shows
There
them
is,
both.
yeah. So they've got time to boundary and distance to boundary. So the time to boundary is the time it will take going in a straight line, and they've got distance to boundary, which is the closest distance. And so you can see those two coming down, and so you know 80 metres, that's your boundary. So you know you're going to get in there, and if there's someone on the inside, then you better start dropping your board. And the boards take between 3 and 4 seconds to drop. So we saw initially people getting used to the T-foils is how long the drop takes, because it's slightly different to the L board. And so as you're going into the boundary, you need to know, when do I go to press the button to get the board down, to get it onto the lock, to get the tackle. And if someone on the inside decides to do it sooner than you and starts turning and you're in the way, then you get a penalty. And we also got to remember the coaches booth as well, because that's set up, and you get many tacticians also come into the coaches booth. So in the coaches booth, they see our unpack, they see the windscreen that the team see, and also they see the onboard video from their own boat, and also what Stevie's watching. And they can listen and they can talk to the teams as well. So you'll hear the coaches, and some are better. Everyone's kind of improving their game to be able to communicate with their team. And there's 6 people on the boat, and you're on the boat comms, and everything's going crazy. Then actually for the coach, they need to know when they should talk. You hear it on the Formula One when Kimi Räikkönen says, "Leave me alone, I know what I'm doing," to his engineer. But it's similar to that, where it's like, do they need the input? When can they put the input in? And so, there's more people that are involved in the ones that are on the boat.
So you're saying that people off the boat can speak to the boat while they're racing?
Yes.
And can they hear each other?
The teams can't hear each other. No.
The coaches can.
The coaches can listen to their own boat, and then they can talk to their own boat. Now, if they're opening their ears, they might listen to the guy next door that's chatting to their boat.
They can't really hear the other coach, but what they can do is, if you say the Australian's going fast, they can instantly press a button and just drag the sail settings and say, okay, they've got 15 degrees of camber in the wing, they've got 40% more twist than you, or whatever it is, and you can instantly send out that setup data. So that's instant. They can be watching the other boat's settings completely like that and send it straight out to them.
So one of your most valuable players is your data analyst that can see all that, because all the data's coming in live.
Why would you allow that? Yeah, so with the data, you talk quite a bit about Formula One. Is there, because to me it sounds much more like a helicopter rental. So it's
helicopters and so much technology.
So is it more Formula One based, or do you have? Are there any inputs from from the pilots?
Well, I think the sailors are sailing the boat for sure, but they get the extra added input from off the boat as well.
I think we say it's Formula One because people understand Formula One,
right?
And that's it's all trying to give it a tangibility across to it. I think that there's input across the board. Why do we do it? I mean, the live thing, interesting question. I guess that maybe it's a bit different. I think in terms of we give everyone the data to try and level the playing field, who can learn the best. And the reality is, if you again, we won't shout about it. You would have. Tom Singsby sailed these type of boats since 2013. Marcini Grail got in it 2 months ago. She's got, and they don't get any training time. And Craig comes into the data. One thing we've got, which perhaps comes back to the helicopter, but also comes back to Formula One and all the rest of it, is the simulator that we've got, and that's I think an area where SailGP are investing, but need to invest a lot more money. The big problem I see with SailGP is we've got these sailors, and I'm older than I look, but they're all about my age, or a little bit younger, but it is an ageing thing, and in terms of having time on the tools, it's hard for new people to come in, and we want it to be a youngster's game because it's happening at youngster's speed, and it's a computer game, and I think that's where the simulator is pretty key. Perhaps put that back to the flying kind of analogy on that, and from all this data, so we can get the information from all the teams. We can then race a model around it, and that's somewhere where SailGP is, I think, doing a good job. I think they need to do a better job, because that's how we do it. But we've actually just moved SailGP Technologies. This is where we have got a win over New Zealand. SailGP Technologies has just moved from New Zealand to just outside Southampton, and down there is a I think it's life size, or it's nearly life size, simulator that's there where the teams can come in and actually train, and it's surprisingly realistic. I think you don't get a bucket of water thrown in your face, but it is. I'm sure they could do that if you ask.
Just conscious of dinner time. There's one more question at the back, and then feel free to come and grill. Okay, we'll do the last two questions. Go for it.
Why would you want to listen to what the team's saying on the boats?
For us, if we can work out what they're about to do, then we can anticipate, what's going to happen to potentially the other boat. So, if someone's splitting off to the left, then you can anticipate, okay, well, if they're going to split off to the left and there's another boat coming in, you can then anticipate what's going to happen 5 seconds, 10 seconds ahead. And so that can really be helpful. And listening to their tactics as well as to where they're going to start on the line. And so that can help us. We often don't get to listen in during the fleet racing because, if you're following the way we work is that, we split the jobs up, essentially up and down the start line. And so we have someone at the top, someone at the bottom, and 2 guys in the middle. And they're swapping boats as the boats manoeuvre. And so the hardest part is actually knowing who's following which boats. And if you're swapping boats all the time, then it's hard to then get to the next step, which is pressing trying to listen into the comm. But in the finals, we absolutely listen to the teams. And before racing as well, we get a feel for, how they're getting on, what's going on the boat, what are they, just picking up any little tidbits that we can that might be of interest and, give us some extra information to help us make decisions.
So does it just say you just can slightly see what's about to happen before it happens? Otherwise it all gets a bit...
Absolutely, because the hardest thing for us is always the anticipation. And, we don't get to go sailing on these boats. In fact, one of the umpires hasn't actually seen one in reality. He's only seen it on a computer cartoon and on the television. So we're gonna rectify that this year and go to Portsmouth on Thursday to have a look round. So the more data we can get from the teams and the more information, then that hopefully helps us to make better calls.
Cool. Last question.
Compared to other professional forms of sailing and racing, what are the skill set differences you're seeing that the teams are seeking and bringing people onto these boats, and perhaps even differences to the American model than now America's Cup? What do you
think? Well, fundamentally, American, again, go to Craig where it's pretty hard. I think the match racing is so. If you've got a faster boat, it's quite an easy game to play. So in the America's Cup, I think you have more of a technological mindset in that design development idea of it. The racing, yes, all right, Ben Ainsley can do the odd good move, but Peter Burling just runs away and goes faster. No problem. Whereas I think from a skill set point of view, and this isn't just me because I'm a 49er sailor, but Diego, the Spanish guy, Dylan, Peter Burling, Nathan Outridge, you're kind of getting that skiff fleet racing but fast boat switch reflex kind of mentality. The American team that have come in with Taylor Canfield, he's a whatever he is, 2-time world match race champion, but he's generally speaking a keelboat kind of guy. And he's, to be frank, he's struggling. They're not doing very well. Whereas this is the guy that's won an awful lot of world championships. I'm not saying he's not a great sailor, but in this particular game, I think that fast decision making and the compromise you have to have, because you have to respect the manoeuvres. So you can't just turn the boat. Like Craig says, you've got to make a decision, right, I need to jibe. Okay, board down, someone's got to have gone across. So that whole ability to communicate, and I think that's something where we underestimate how much, from my, I was in a privileged position of working with Athena, and so I did see Ben a little bit during the summer, and that was one place, I went to China with him, and, I'm not sure anyone really knows Ben very well, but I had a level of friendship, and I could say, I think you're doing a great job with your comms. Where we actually made Dylan perhaps not feel petrified or like a spare part. You know, he felt he's part of the team. And I think someone like for Ben and for Giles, that's an area where they've had to really develop in terms of that communicating. You know, they've got an amazing threshold for decision making and doing all this in their own head, but when they've got to do it as part of the team, and I think someone like Carl Langford, and again, where, you know, hopefully I'll keep my job, but hopefully in a few years' time, you will be able to, you know, choose to turn me off and listen just to the comms of another boat, because someone like Carl Langford does an incredible job of painting the picture. So I think communication is probably the skill set, you know, along with that quick decision making, where, you know, it is a very different game to America's Cup. Bloody hard for him, much as I don't like to say that, but he's not just judging two boats where it's painfully obvious they're going to go all the way to boundary attack, and, you know, there's all sorts of things going on. I think decision making in comms is the skill set that's quite specific to.
Yeah, if you're on Instagram, go and have a look at the Brazilian team's Instagram from January and watch the flight control. I mean, you've seen that footage of Andy Maloney in the windy day. Good God, I don't know how he's controlling the boat. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't have a clue where to start. And it's impressive. It's kind of that Game Boy generation of it coming into it as well.
He's totally dependent on the communication from Lee McMillan saying there's a gust coming, big wave set coming, to know what he's got to anticipate.
Yeah, if you see it, it's just what's going on. Right. I just want to say, honestly, to have Stevie and Craig here is such a privilege for the club. So hope you join me in just thanking them, and thank you guys.